conversations with my own mother about what we understand by the word feminism, what we understand by agency, as you talked about. Everything that I know or that I understand about feminism has come from my own mother. And at the same time, there are a lot of moments that we have of conflict in terms of not necessarily always agreeing on certain things. And so I thought it would be a good idea to sort of bring those reflections to the forefront. The background to this is also, as you know, I talk about it a little bit in the book, and you might have heard about it otherwise, but we have our feminist women's movement called Aurat March in Pakistan, which has sort of had a resurgence, so to say, from 2018. We've had, previous movements. Again, I don't like to use the word previous because I think they, all movements sort of build on one another in different ways. But a lot of the backlash that we've been seeing since 2018 to Aurat March, a lot of the sort of criticisms that we see with Aurat March have to do with this idea that they're sort of breaking away from the feminisms of the past, or they're kind of undoing the work of previous movements because they're focusing on the wrong things, or they're talking too much about bodily autonomy when they should be talking about things like financial independence. So, there are a lot of these different criticisms that we see coming around, and a lot of that sort of divide between those, the generations of the movement, so to say. And at the same time, we're seeing a lot of this, even with our celebrities kind of going on national television, a lot of the media talking about how, feminism is a Western construct. It's something that, it's a Western construct that we have adopted that doesn't have space in our society. You have celebrities kind of going and saying, we are not feminists. We believe in equality, but we're not feminists. Even, I often talk about my aunt who recently passed away, who is possibly the most feminist person I knew, but even she would sometimes be like, I am not a feminist, right? But dot, 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 kind of go on to say all these feminist things. So it was all of this sort of, that was sort of background around it. And then thinking about all the contributions in this book are written by writers who in their own field are doing immense amount of work, immense amount of labor for, sort of feminist labor in their own fields. And I wanted to bring their voices to the forefront and have them sort of reflect on their own relationships with their mothers or their maternal figures, so to say, and try and kind of go through and look through those relationships to find and understand what different kinds of feminisms mean.
Yeah, thank you so much. For whoever has just joined us, I just wanted to say that you can feel free to respond to or chip in whenever you like. You can also leave questions in the chat if you'd like to say something or interact with Danica. And thank you for joining us. The next question, Danica, that I had for you was really about motherhood. And I think we spoke a little bit about this earlier also, but partly what understanding of motherhood has really accrued for you while putting this collection together? But also now that you are a mom, could you also say a little bit about how that has deepened or complexified your understanding of this category? So yeah, two parts in that question.
Yeah. No, of course. Yeah, so yeah, I recently become a mom just 3 months ago to a little girl. And I think so for the former part of that question, I think it is important for us to acknowledge that, motherhood isn't as straightforward as we may think, right? There are a lot of different relationships that can take on the role of mothering. So it's not necessarily only the relationship that you have with the woman that gave birth to you, so to say. And I think that came through a lot in this collection of essays. There are numerous essays that talk about, the very different women that took on the role of mothers for these writers. And some of the writers also spoke about how they, as daughters, sometimes had to mother their own mothers, right? So there was this idea that also came forth. So it is sort of the theoretical themes and ideas surrounding mothering more than perhaps around motherhood that is reflected in these pieces. But then on the other side of it, having become a mother recently myself, I think that this sort of divide between theory and lived reality has suddenly sort of collapsed into one for me. there are all of these ideas that I've spent the last maybe decade or so reading about, researching about, motherhood as an institution, on gender, on patriarchy, on care work, on, generational trauma. A lot of these ideas that were reflected in the pieces as well. But I think after becoming a mother, these ideas suddenly have become a lot more embodied, a lot more textured, and a lot more confusing in a lot of ways, I'd say, right? In ways that I wasn't really perhaps able to capture before in the more sort of abstract ways of looking at these things. And I think the main thing that I've come to realize, having thought about this in the last few months, is that motherhood as a role can sometimes be quite impossible. I think we're, so often trying to you sort of oscillate between needing to be endlessly available as mothers, but also wanting to be independent as women. I'm finding myself sort of, in between this thing where we're sort of nurturing this new life, but at the same time also feeling like we're losing ourselves. And I think it's that realization that new mothers, especially, we're made quite invisible in society, right? Because I think a lot of their labor, their experiences are largely sort of bracketed under being normal or natural. Um, and the issue with that is that, she's sort of hidden from view if she talks about the fact that she had a difficult pregnancy or a difficult birth experience, or the fact that she's unable to breastfeed, or the fact that she's feeling exhausted, mentally drained, her body is not recovering as fast as society would like it to. A lot of this is because of the lack of support that she's receiving from society and, systemically. Um, but I think the idea is that sort of instead of recognizing and acknowledging, the patriarchy's role in this, because these things are so often sort of positioned as being personal failures, we're ashamed for talking about it, encouraged not to speak about it, and that ends up just isolating women and making them more invisible. And so I think reflecting on that, a lot of the criticisms that I perhaps once had of my own mother are suddenly becoming a lot more complicated because I'm starting to sort of see and experience the constraints that she was up against, the trade-offs that she had to make. Even thinking just for me to be available for 1 hour to do this, the different arrangements I had to make sure that the baby is cared for, to make sure that, food is done. My husband had to move things around to make sure that he had, that little block of time free to take the baby. But suddenly, you're realizing that it's so much more complicated than we may have thought from an abstract point of view. And at the same time, I'm feeling this very urgent need to want to raise or be able to raise my daughter in a world where she is not made invisible. And so I guess in that sense, a sort of the category of motherhood, it stops, it becomes this sort of a lived contradiction, rather, in a lot of ways, where I'm realizing just how much of myself is entangled with the mothers that came before me and also everything that I'm hoping comes after me for my own daughter.
Yeah, I think both the word impossibility and contradiction are really very like poignant and stayed with me as you were answering this. And also, uh, many of the women in the book are contradictory people. I was wondering if you had any bits from the book or sketches of motherhood or of mothering from the book that stand out to you that you would like to share maybe with listeners right now.
Um, I think all of the pieces were so different and so important in all of their own ways. I think there is one line that I make a note of, and I actually refer to it quite often, mostly because I think it captures quite a bit, and you see it a lot. You'll see it a lot in Pakistan. I'm sure you'll see it a lot in India as well. And that's this idea about how when we're raising women, daughters are raised to be women, well-spoken yet soft-spoken, to be educated just enough to adequately carry themselves in a decent society, but not enough that they question the decency of that society. And I think that really encapsulates a lot of what a lot of the different writers were talking about in their own pieces. Um, a lot of, when I mean, I can give some examples. Zoya, for example, talks about the quite a difficult relationship that she had with her mother. You have Tuba talking about all the various different mothers in her life. Again, we talk about, mothering and the maternal figures. We talk a bit about how Saba talks a bit about how her mother sort of is evolving, right? And how she has seen her mother evolve in different ways and her understanding of feminism evolve in different ways. We have I think it was Shamaila who talks about the different stages in her mother's life and in her life, and how she has seen her mother differently within those different phases. So I think they're all so very special, and I think the important aspect to keep in mind with all of this is precisely the fact that you can see how every woman is very different and how every relationship is very different. And understandings of feminism are different, understandings of equality and what it means to be equal, and how they come to form in different ways. And I think that's what makes it so special.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think uh, it's become maybe easier recently to say things about how spiny or complicated mother figures can be. And what I love about many of these accounts is that, uh, uh, I mean, the writers who have, I think, obviously dealt with a lot of like gone back into some of their most difficult memories to really talk about some of those more taboo moments of yeah, what happens between a mother and a daughter. And I think I was really also thinking about this, like the personal stakes of feminism, like how do we as feminists with a certain set of values have conversations with um, women who don't identify as feminists, who may in their own way or in
Mhm.
their own homes have practiced very feminist acts without calling them those names. But like there are still frictions that come up in these worldviews and that we have to like live through every day. Uh, so yeah, I was wondering
Yeah.
about those, yeah, personal political moments.
I think part of why it's so messy and why motherhood is messy is because it's never just about one woman, right? It is about these sort of multiple generations. It is about these different multiple histories that are living inside that woman. And so when we fight with our mothers or we're sort of in conflict with our mothers, we're often wrestling not only with her, but with an entire system that shaped her, right? And that includes fears that she may have inherited from her own mother or from the other women around her. It could be, the gender roles that she felt that she didn't have a choice but to sort of embrace. Limitations that she had, whether imposed by family or by society, and the tools that she essentially created, right, to cope with those sort of limitations. And so, what that means is that a lot of the feminist work that we do in terms of wanting more choices or wanting to set boundaries or refusing to be silent, all of these things can very much be at odds with the survival strategies that our mothers had. And those were the same strategies that she used to protect us, right? That's how she sees it. So we can see how that can in turn end up causing a bit of conflict. And it's confusing and it can be painful because, breaking these sort of old patterns can feel in a lot of ways that we're rejecting our mothers, right? And on the other hand, the argument is that, we're trying to hold bigger and bolder spaces for ourselves. And indeed, by default, and also for her. So I think for me, the sort of attempt at reconciling the sort of personal and political sides of feminism, a part of that is to let both things be true. The idea that our mothers did what they could with the tools that were provided to them, even if we didn't agree with them. And that as daughters, we can grow into what they may not have imagined for themselves in a lot of ways. So I think those moments of conflict, those moments of tension, those difficult conversations, in their own way, can also be moments of clarity, can also be moments of learning.
I feel like that was a very insightful answer, and I'm going to be thinking about it for a while to come. I wanted to shift a little to talking about the effect of history on, on household feminism, I guess. As you mentioned earlier, women's movements in Pakistan have had an impact on like what the popular cultural feminist
Mhm.
course is. So if you could say a little bit about how these watershed public movements impact, the day-to-day transaction of feminism.
Yeah, so I think I'm actually going to answer this keeping in mind some of the placards that really caused a lot of stir in Pakistan. You might have heard about some of them, seen some of them, but you talked about the household, and that's what came to mind for me. So there are a couple of placards that really pissed people off, essentially. One of them said, Khana khud garam kar lo. And the other one said something along the lines of, mujhe kya pata moze kahan hai, or something like that. So they both reflected on very sort of everyday ideas, right? This idea that, you should go and warm up your own food, find your own socks, very sort of basic everyday things. But it caused a huge amount of backlash. This combined with the fact that, for example, the most popular slogan associated with Aurat March is a direct translation of My Body, My Choice. So it's Mera Jism Meri Marzi, which we know is to mean, talks about bodily autonomy, talks about violence against women, all of those things, but has been construed as being a lot more sexual than it is meant to. And again, has caused a lot of backlash. So I think that the thing is that, when these sort of big movements happen, I mean, of course, I think part of the reason why there's been such a backlash is precisely because the movement is so visible. Is this, the fact that there's so many women and men, right, out on the streets now. It's the fact that they are taking the public streets when when the public does not want you to. The fact that there have been petitions made against the march, there have been physically attacked. Police has come and tried to arrest. I mean, it's been everything you can imagine in terms of that backlash. Um, but I think the fact that it is so visible, the fact that it is getting bigger every year, the fact that even in some of the essays we talked about how, even contributors' mothers who weren't necessarily very, who didn't necessarily accompany them to the march at the first instance are now accompanying them. So there is this, I think there is this sort of a shift in a certain, in the mindset in some ways about what is meant by the word feminism. Again, trying to remove that sort of connotation that others are trying to put on it and be like, it is very much about equality. And at the same time, it's, I think, the fact that there's all of this visual imagery and representation around Earth March now with these placards, which, through Twitter, through social media, really expands and gets the message across. And you see I mean, I'll give you an example of the kind of backlash we had. I think it was back in 2018 or 2019. There was a Mard March and a host of images on social media with men holding placards saying things like, I'll warm up my own food, but you won't get my credit card, or something like that, So there is a lot of that as well. But I think it's precisely because these women are taking the personal, they're taking what happens within the household out on the streets, that it is seen as being so, yeah, difficult for the public to accept.
Yeah, I think like that'll always be the hardest, the longest and most difficult to accept battle in feminism, like just the understanding that the private space has to be punctured, and what's
Hmm.
happening inside is political. But okay, so I also wanted to maybe now give people who are listening a chance to ask any questions if they'd like to. And then we can move on to a few more of mine. Okay, so in case we don't have anything now, I wanted to ask you, move on to asking you a little bit, Danika, about the process of actually putting together a collection of writings. I think editing is a very like unique challenge and something that maybe a lot of readers don't know about, like what kind of thinking goes into framing a group of diverse voices, putting them together under one thematic umbrella. Um, and then also, allowing each of those voices to shine. So what kind of like restraint is going in there? What kind of thinking is going in there? Could you say a little bit about the editorial process?
Yeah. So so the first step for me, so once I sort of, had this it was a very sort of vague idea. I was kind of on a walk with my husband and I thought this is something that I want to do, but I hadn't really framed it even for myself yet, exactly how it would work. And there were a few different things, initially I thought, would it make sense to actually have mothers and daughters in conversation with each other, so almost like a back and forth sort of thing. Then I thought maybe we can get mothers and daughters to write essays together. And then I thought if I had to write an essay with my mother, I think we both would completely lose it at each other. We would not be happy. So I was like, maybe that's not the way to do it. And I was like, all right, let's try, with the daughters reflecting on their relationships with their mother. So the first step was kind of putting together a brief. It was putting together what the theme was, what I sort of envisioned, for it. Um, I didn't want it to restrict the writers too much in terms of the content in any way, right? It was as long as they're sort of reflecting on their relationships and how it shaped them and their own feminist identities. Um, and then it was sort of, once you had the brief, it was, identifying and then reaching out to various writers. Um, I mentioned at the beginning that, all of the amazing contributions in this book are by women who are doing absolutely brilliant things in their own fields. Some of them I knew through my work, some of them I knew, socially, some of them I had just come across, on social media. So it was very much kind of filtering through, women who have done a lot of work in this area, who I know would have, a story to tell. And I was reaching out to them and asking if they would like to come on board. I was very, very lucky that all of them said yes almost immediately. And we had this, very solid um, 20 authors that kind of came on board for it. The next step was then to find a publisher. So, along with the brief, I needed at least, sort of two or three sample essays to kind of get a sense of what the book was going to look like. So once I had those two or three sample essays, I put together a book proposal and I sent it out. Zubaan was obviously one of my first choices because it is a feminist publishing house, and I absolutely love the work that they put forward. Um, and then it was, as the sort of, once the contract is done, as the essays come in, it's very much about sort of a back and forth between you and each of the authors to make certain editorial choices. Whether it's sort of editing this thing, reframing this thing, can we add a bit more here? Can we remove this? Let's see if the flow is a bit better. Um, and then putting together the manuscript. I think even with that, I think the longest task probably in this process for me was to actually determine the order of the essays, because I wanted that order to also tell a bit of a story. A lot of people sort of said, it's okay because with anthologies, it's very rare for someone to kind of read it start to finish. They usually kind of go back to different essays or different stories. But I wanted that to tell a bit. I wanted for us to find a way to position each of those essays in a way that also tells a story from start to finish. And yeah, I mean, there were obviously some issues in terms of the fact that, Zubaan could not get the book into Pakistan. So we had a local publisher in Pakistan that I had quite a few issues with because they actually ended up censoring the book. They removed one of the essays from the book when they released it. And that was quite against, the feminist ethos that the book so boldly sort of took on. So that was quite a difficult thing to grapple with. Zubaan was very fortunate in that they actually released that one essay online so that readers from Pakistan could access it. But all of that to say, it's never straightforward. It's never a very easy process. There are different things, that kind of happen along the way that we just kind of have to deal with. But it was a very, very enriching experience. The fact that I got to know these women quite well as well during this process, apart from having, the privilege of being able to read their work and edit their work and work with them. That was very, very special to me as well.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I also think I think there's another part of the editorial process that you want to talk a little bit about, which is the cover.
Yes.
Would you like to? So for those of you who can't, I mean, I don't know if you can see it in mirror image, but you will have received the book as a part of your subscription, and it's an absolutely gorgeous cover. So yeah, why don't you tell us the story behind it?
Yes. So the cover is by Samia Arif. She is an illustrator from Pakistan. And I honestly cannot thank her enough for being a part of this. I feel like she really just brought the collection together. Um, And I'd given her a very small brief about what I had sort of envisioned, for the cover, mostly that I wanted it to have some, signify some intergenerational relationships between women. And I told her that I wanted it to be playful and colorful, and that was mostly because a lot of the images that we see often associated with, Pakistani women and feminism, they tend to be quite dreary. So perhaps they want to sort of evoke sadness or anger or, I understand why that might be, but I wanted to sort of move away from that imagery here and focus more on the fact that feminism can be quite joyful. Um, and Samia just ran with that, and she created a really, really beautiful cover. And there are a lot of little Easter eggs in the artwork. So the sort of the hair braiding evokes memories of storytelling. So we see three different women from different generations, sort of braiding each other's hair to sort of, and each of them sort of reflect differences in culture, outlook, demeanor. So you'll notice that the eldest woman's gaze, for example, is lowered with her eyes almost shut, versus the youngest one who is sort of directly looking at us. So that's kind of showing, the sort of journey of Pakistani women as they find their feminist identity. She also drew a lot of inspiration from Pakistani patterns and textiles for the detailing. So, Islamic architecture around the women. And I think one of the main things that you might not notice immediately is the sort of gradient hue in the background, which goes from purple to orange, and that is paying homage to the colors of the women's movement in Pakistan over generations as well. So it's yeah, she's it was way beyond anything I could have imagined for the cover myself.
Yeah, no, it's a really beautiful cover. And as you're telling me more about it, I'm seeing all the detail. And the eyes are truly a lovely touch.
Yeah.
Lastly, Danika, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you have been reading recently, and also about what you generally, I don't know if you read anthologies, but if you do, what are some of your favorite collections of essays?
Yeah, so I mean right now I'm reading Heartland, which is actually by an Indian author. It's absolutely brilliant. Again, a bit of a heavy book, so it's one of those that you want um to read quite slowly. If for those who don't know, it's a collection of short stories, and it deals a lot with themes such as with domestic violence, again, honor, women, equality, all of those things. Um, and the other one that I read quite recently that I really enjoyed reading was by Amia Srivasaran. She's a professor at Oxford. It's called The Right to Sex, and it's a collection of essays, and again, kind of grappling with themes of, how we understand sex, how we understand gender, how we understand identity, how we look at a lot of the sort of taboo subjects and topics. And again, it's a very, very, very good read. One that really makes you think. So those are the two that come to mind right now. And I mean, I think I also just wanted to add. I meant to mention this a bit earlier, but we're even when we're talking about, with the cover, with the sort of generations, there's often this idea that feminism is quite linear, that feminism, um, we talk about these waves of feminism, first wave, second wave, third wave, and how, this is a very sort of, the progression is quite linear and straightforward. Um, and I don't necessarily see it like that. I think in the same beat right now, what we're seeing is that there's one part of the world where contraception becomes more socially acceptable, and in the other part of the world, you have women who are losing their right to abortion. And when you're reflecting on that and you're kind of seeing where we are right now, we're seeing, we kind of think back to our grandmothers who chose to stay in difficult marriages because they saw that as a survival mechanism versus her granddaughter today who chooses to leave a difficult marriage because she sees that as a survival mechanism, right? And given that protection for one woman might be seen as confinement for another, and thinking about these generational freedoms in, you know, it just, to me, kind of moving away from that very linear straight, clear timeline makes a lot more sense. And perhaps feminism is best sort of explained as this constant negotiation with the world around us, bearing in mind that the world is quite different from one generation to the next. And I think that's also what the cover sort of is reflects for me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a powerful idea that like progress is only something that can be evaluated in a particular context. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, if listeners here would like to ask questions or make any comments based on this conversation or your reading of the book.
Hi. Sorry. Uh, Sorry. Am I visible and audible? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, Danika. So I have read your book, and Dakshani, if you ask me, I think it is one of my favorite anthologies of short essays. And I don't have a question per se, but I just want to just reflect on like how I felt about the book and like while reading it as well. So the book for me was such an important thing to read because of course there is also a personal relation with your mother and how you see and how you have seen your own feminism evolve. And while and that's what came out in the book also a lot, that like a lot of them do not call themselves feminists, but then they would do something or they would advocate for something that would be very feminist, but at the other time they would do something or harm us in a way that would actually be quite opposite. But then we also see the feminisms, and like you have talked about it in the introduction as well, feminisms coming around because there's no one certain kind of feminism. And I think the book has also come out at such an important juncture because the more the word feminism is conflated with like modernist ideas of progression, which when I think of it, it just seems like a scam to me. And an idea of feminism is pushed, which is a very Western idea. And like you also said that like the waves of feminism, like in South Asia, I'm from India, so in South Asia, like we don't think of how feminism has evolved in our region in that way, right? Because there have been so many movements in so many regions of South Asia, and it has not exactly evolved in the waves form of way, and it does not exist in that way today as well. And so to have a book that talks about South Asian mothers and the feminisms of those mothers, and to also say that like while we also do battles of like workspace and do negotiation with capitalism per se, we do not just call that our feminisms. We do not buy into the theory of um calling a Western idea of feminism just our feminism. So for me, like this book is it's like a warm hug, honestly, because it it talks about so many small things. I actually ended up buying two copies because I wanted someone else to also read it, and I feel like a lot of people around us should read it because it just talks about so many realities. And I think before this, I had read the Burstow uh, uh, article, which talks about, relations with motherhood, mothers, but this one gives it so much South Asian context. So I just wanted to say that out loud, and like also let you know that like you have people in India who are like looking up to the book, and today I'm just like, I feel really nice to have connected with you as well.
Thank you so much. That's really, really heartwarming, and I really appreciate it. I'm so happy that the book resonates. I think that the entire point of putting this collection together was relatability for me. It was the fact that, there's so many of us across borders that are going through and have very similar experiences, and to be able to talk about them and talk about them out loud, and to sort of know that we're not alone in those experiences. Thank you very much. That was really, really very kind and very heartwarming.
And thank you for the book. Yeah.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello? Yeah. Hi, Danika. Thank you for doing this today, first of all. I haven't had the chance to read your book in its entirety yet, but I just wanted to know your thoughts about this one particular thing, which I think keeps coming across my mind whenever I read something that is very specific to us in South Asia, but will something that is probably going to be overlooked, especially in the West, because they have this unity of language and also culture in a way, but with the kind of diversity that we have to that we live and that we negotiate with on a daily basis. What do you think about the lexicon that we use, especially while talking about feminist ideals? And like you said, it almost becomes like a conversation that is in translation while we're trying to put out something like that, even if it's in any sort of media, but especially in writing when we are trying to talk about um, all these relationships that we have within the family, within the society, and we're trying to put it out in a way that we understand that it is feminist or progressive in a certain way, but then we often, even as speakers and writers of English, we find ourselves failing to really translate that into something that is, that something can be understood by people who don't have that context as a lived experience. So, yeah, I was just thinking of like, when you're putting together something like this, did you have something specific in mind that, this is the way I want these essays to just sound, or like what would be the readership, like who would be reading this book and will they be understanding this or not? And yeah, I was just thinking along, the lines of this like translation, which is not really one, but also, something that you already do and then put it out on paper. Um, so yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah, thank you. That is such an important question. And I think the first thing to acknowledge is, by default, the fact that this book is published in English means that it is only accessible to a certain segment of our society, right, across South Asia. Um, I think that is part of, it's very important to acknowledge. And I actually, if I may answer this question, not reflecting a little bit on this book, but actually on my second book, which was my academic monograph, which is where I really had to grapple with this. So my book is, it's published last year. It was on domestic violence in Pakistan, and it was based on a lot of the empirical research that I did, fieldwork that I did in the courts in Karachi and Islamabad and Lahore as well. And a lot of that, it was a lot of my interviews were done in Urdu, right? They were done in the local languages. And a lot of the process that I had to then go through was of this translation, um, to try and make that accessible to an audience here in the UK, which is where I was doing my PhD. And I think, this was something that I grappled with a lot because I felt that even as I was translating everything, I didn't want to make use of these sort of automatic translation services precisely because I think a lot of how we speak is kind of, fluctuating between English and Urdu or English and Hindi or whatever it may be. So that already wouldn't work. But then the other part of it was I could never really capture the essence of what was said to me when I translated that into English. So what I ended up doing throughout that book was that any moment that I felt that my translation is not doing this justice, I would just put my translation and in brackets put it in the native language that it was spoken to me in, just so that readers who do understand that can actually read it and sort of read it firsthand, and they don't need to understand my they don't need to take my interpretation or my translation of that as fact, and rather they can have their own meaning and understanding of what that person said to me in that native language. I think it is such an important aspect of the work that we do, and this is something that I, even as an academic in the UK, I'm constantly grappling with because the stories that we tell are all from back home. The research that I do is all from back home. But then there is this process that I need to put all of that through in order for people here to take it seriously. Um, and it is the most difficult thing to do, to try and do justice to the voices and those stories that you are telling and you're putting forward, while at the same time trying to not lose that essence when putting this out in English. So I think it's a very important, it's something that, I try to acknowledge and I think it's very important to keep it in mind whenever we are writing, whenever we are producing any sort of knowledge, whenever we are sharing our stories, whenever we are sharing others' stories as well. Um, but yeah, that's just one of the techniques that I've used. And yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very, very important aspect to keep in mind.
I can ask another question if that's okay. Um, yeah, so I was wondering, like, when you said that the initial
Hi.
idea.
I just wanted to share that I had gifted this book to first of all, congratulate this knowledge that has been shared through this book. I actually, once I started reading about it, I wanted my aunt to have it. Now she's in her 70s, and every time I thought about this book,
Sorry, is it just me? I can't
I
really
I
hear.
could picture her because she was one of those women who would like call men out, and she was like the rebel in the family. And
Sorry, Mamita, would you be able to sorry, it's cutting quite a bit and we aren't really able to hear you. Would it be possible to put it in the chat maybe?
Um, Achal, I think you were going to say something in the meantime. You could maybe go ahead and ask your question. Sorry, Momita, we couldn't really hear all of what you were saying, but thank you for your question.
Yeah, so sorry for taking so much space. I know I've already spoken a lot, but I just also want to ask, when you said that the initial idea of the book was that mothers and daughters both write it together, and then to the realization that Yeah, that may not work. But do you think of mothers as the target audience for this? Like, do you think of mothers as readers for this book? That is one of the questions. But I think one of the things that Momita was saying was that she gifted it to an aunt. So I'm not exactly sure where that was going. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you that.
I mean, for me, when putting this together, I think the target audience was the multiple generations. I think a lot of it was, our generation to kind of read and feel heard in a lot of ways, right? And feel seen and sort of that relatability. And then the other part of it was also, our mothers and the mothers that came before to, because I think in a lot of ways, it is there through our reading, through our writing, they're also being seen, if that makes sense. I mean, before, and I think I'm not sure how many of the contributors did this, but for example, the piece that I wrote about my mother and my grandmother, I ran it by them before I put it in the book, right? Because I'm also telling their stories, and it was important for me to ensure that I got the facts of those stories accurate, that I wasn't speaking for them in a lot of ways. So there was my own reflection of their experiences, but then their experiences, I wanted to make sure that they were okay with me putting it out in the public. And I'm sure there were other contributors that did the same thing. Um, and having said that, my mother was the first one to go into, when the book was published, to go and pick up like 10 copies of it, gave it to everyone she knew. Um, a lot of, my aunts, even my grandmother, before she passed, read the book. So it's, I think the target audience is not necessarily just this generation. I think it is very much the other generations as well.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Um, Thank you so much, Danika, for this lovely evening, for your insights and what you shared about how you put the book together, but also everything you've shared about your life actually in the process. And thank you to our readers and subscribers and everyone who attended. And I hope you found this interaction with Danika as valuable as I did. Um, yeah, with that, I think we'd like to say thank you from Champaca for being here this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And also a big thank you to Urvashi, who's here, who believed in the book the second I sent her the proposal and gave it a home. So I just wanted to give her a quick shout out. There she is. And thank you, Lakshini. Thank you to the team at Champaka for having me. Thank you for all of the insightful questions, for engaging with the book. I'm so happy that it resonated. I'm so happy that it was such a special project for me. So I'm just really glad that the rest of you found it special as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Danika. Bye bye.